The rain fell in relentless sheets over the quiet town of Millfield, soaking the streets and turning the gutters into miniature rivers. It was nearly 9 p.m. when Ethan Cole locked the doors to his garage, tugging his flannel jacket tighter against the cold. The fluorescent lights inside flickered off, leaving the small lot bathed in dim street lamp glow and the occasional flash of lightning overhead. Ethan was a man of habit. Fix cars by day, clean up by evening, then head to his modest home just 5 blocks away. But that night, something pulled at him to linger just a bit longer. As he stepped off the curb, the roar of an engine sputtering caught his attention. Looking up, he saw a sleek, black sedan pulled to the side of the road, steam hissing from beneath the hood. Through the driving rain, he could just make out the figure of a woman pacing in front of the car, holding her phone in the air in a hopeless search for a signal. Her coat clung to her like a second skin, drenched and useless against the cold. Ethan hesitated for only a second before jogging over, his boots splashing through puddles. "Need some help," he called out, raising his voice over the rain and wind. The woman turned, startled, then offered a half-nervous, half-relieved smile. "I think my engine overheated. Or maybe something else. I have no idea. I was on my way through town when it started making this awful sound. Now it just died. Let's get you out of this rain first," Ethan said, motioning toward the open garage behind him. "I've got tools, heat, and probably the last dry coffee in town." And she hesitated, but the wind gusted again, and she nodded quickly. "Thank you. I didn't expect this kind of weather, or this kind of welcome." Ethan opened the side door to his garage, flipping the lights back on and guiding her inside. The space smelled of motor oil and rain, damp concrete, but it was warm thanks to a small heater in the corner. He offered her a towel and his jacket, which hung by the wall. She accepted both without complaint. "I'm Ethan," he said, starting to unroll a toolkit. "You're lucky I hadn't left yet." "I'm Claire," she said quietly, rubbing her hands together. "Thanks for doing this. I really didn't know what to do." "No problem. Looks like your radiator hose popped loose. Should be a quick fix. Nothing too serious," Ethan said as he grabbed a wrench. He glanced at her again. She was striking even under the harsh shop lights. Sophisticated, poised, but clearly uncomfortable, like someone used to control who suddenly found herself helpless. She wandered the garage as he worked, asking questions about his tools, the cars he'd restored, the old photographs on the wall. He answered without bragging, just matter of factly, the way a man talks about the things he's known his whole life. When he finished tightening the hose and refilling the coolant, he handed her a dry cup of coffee from his thermos. "You're all set," he said with a grin. "Should hold up fine until you get wherever you're going." Claire took the cup gratefully, her eyes meeting his. "Ethan, I don't know how to thank you. Most people wouldn't have even stopped. I figure, if we all help each other a little more, the world's a better place." He shrugged. "You don't have to thank me." But she did thank him. 3 times, in fact. She gave back the jacket, now slightly damp, and pulled her keys from her purse. "Maybe someday I'll return the favor," she said with a soft smile before stepping out into the night. Ethan watched as her car disappeared into the misty darkness, taillights fading behind a curtain of rain. He didn't even know her last name, just Claire. By the time he walked home that night, Ethan had already pushed the memory to the back of his mind. He wasn't the type to expect anything in return. To him, it was just another night, just another good deed. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that this single act of kindness would change his life forever. And it would all begin again 2 days later, when a helicopter would land in front of his house. The morning sun broke over Millfield 2 days later, casting golden light across the modest row of houses lining the outskirts of town. Ethan Cole sat at his kitchen table, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug and flipping through an old automotive magazine. It was a rare day off, no appointments scheduled, no emergencies, and no plans beyond rest. He had nearly forgotten about the woman from the rainy night, Claire. A strange encounter, but nothing more than that. People came and went through Millfield all the time, Just as he reached for the radio knob, a low, distant thumping interrupted the calm. At first, he thought it might be construction or a passing truck. But the sound grew louder, closer, until the windows began to tremble, and the walls hummed with vibration. Ethan stood up and looked out the front door, blinking into the rising light. There, descending into the empty lot across from his home, was a helicopter. It was sleek, black, and unmistakably expensive. The kind of aircraft you'd expect to see in a movie, not in the middle of rural Pennsylvania. A gust of wind swept through the neighborhood as the chopper landed, flattening grass and sending dust into the air. Neighbors peeked through their blinds or stepped onto porches, murmuring in confusion and awe. Ethan stepped out cautiously, shielding his eyes from the rotor wash. The helicopter's engine wound down, and the side door opened. From within emerged two sharply dressed men in suits, followed by a woman in tailored attire and sunglasses. Her auburn hair whipped slightly in the wind as she stepped onto the ground, smiling directly at Ethan. It was Claire. She approached with a confident stride, her presence commanding but warm. "Ethan Cole," she called out over the settling noise, removing her sunglasses. "I hope I'm not interrupting your morning." Ethan stared at her in stunned silence. "Claire," he asked, disbelieving. What is all this?" She laughed lightly. "I owe you an explanation. And a proper thank you." One of the men handed Ethan a sealed envelope, while the other gestured for them to step aside from the still, idling helicopter. Claire led him a few feet away and took a breath, her voice steady and sincere. "I wasn't entirely honest with you the other night," she began. "My name is Claire Wexler. I'm the CEO of Wextech Global." She paused to let that sink in. Ethan's eyes widened. He had heard of the company. A leader in everything from AI research to vehicle design, with contracts in dozens of countries. "I was traveling alone that night under a false name," she continued. "I needed a break from corporate life. No staff, no security, just me. And when my car broke down, you helped me without hesitation, without asking for anything. You didn't know who I was. That mattered." Ethan shook his head slowly. "I didn't need to know. You were stranded in the rain. That was enough." The Claire smiled again, more genuine this time. "Exactly. That's why I'm here." She handed him the envelope. "This is a formal invitation. I'm opening a research and development hub not far from here. A facility focused on advanced vehicle systems, especially for crisis response and underserved communities. I want you on my team." Ethan blinked. "I'm just a mechanic." She tilted her head. "You're more than that. I've seen your work. I looked you up. Your designs, your restorations, your problem solving. It's exceptional. Degrees matter, sure, but talent, heart, and experience matter more. I'll provide any training you need. I just need people I can trust." Ethan stared at the envelope in his hand. The paper was thick, embossed with gold. Inside was an offer letter, salary, relocation assistance if needed, training schedules. It felt surreal, like he was dreaming. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Say yes," Claire replied softly. This could be the start of something incredible. He looked around his quiet street, the faded paint of his home, the garage he'd worked in for over a decade, the familiarity of a simple life. And then he looked back at her, at the helicopter behind her, and the unbelievable future suddenly within reach. "Give me a day to think," he asked. Claire nodded. "Of course. But I think you already know." As she turned to leave, the helicopter roared back to life, lifting her into the sky and leaving a stunned, awestruck Ethan standing in the middle of his yard, invitation in hand, future wide open. Ethan hardly slept that night. The envelope Claire Wexler had handed him lay on his kitchen table like a golden ticket. Something out of a dream. His fingers had traced the embossed lettering so many times he could now feel the indentations even with his eyes closed. He had always believed his life was meant to be small, greasy hands, engine parts, and the rhythmic comfort of routine. The garage was his world, and fixing cars for the townspeople of Millfield had always been enough. But now, something bigger had landed, quite literally, in his front yard, and it was impossible to ignore the way his heart beat faster every time he thought of what Claire had offered him. By morning, Ethan was still torn. He stared at the coffee brewing in his old percolator and thought about the risks. Who was he to design high-tech vehicles? He had no degree, no formal background, just years of experience under the hood of old pickups and broken, down sedans. Yet, the confidence in Claire's voice kept echoing in his head. She had looked him in the eye, seen something in him, and declared it worthy of a chance. He drove to the edge of town where the new Wextech facility was already under construction. The sleek, modern buildings rose out of the earth like something from the future. Large glass panels gleamed under the sun, and drones hovered, surveying the progress. A man with a tablet met him at the gate and, recognizing his name, guided him inside. Claire was already waiting in a minimalist conference room, sipping tea and reviewing blueprints. She stood when she saw him, offering that same easy smile she had worn in the rain. "I had a feeling you'd come," she said. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Still feels like I'm dreaming." Claire gestured for him to sit. "Let me make it real, then. We're developing vehicles that can go where traditional ones can't. Disaster zones, remote villages, places with no infrastructure. All electric, modular, self-repairing. But we need someone who understands practical mechanics. Someone who can design systems that work under pressure, not just look good on paper. That's you." He frowned slightly. "But I'm not an engineer." "You're more than that," she said, eyes locking with his. "You've fixed things with nothing but duct tape and grit. You know what lasts and what fails. I don't want textbook theories. I want reality. I want heart." That word stuck, heart. It was what Ethan had always put into his work, even if no one else saw it. Claire slid a document across the table. "I'm offering you a 6-month trial period. Full training, mentorship, and a team that will support your transition. You'll be working alongside our brightest minds. You'll have housing near the facility, full benefits, and creative freedom. If you're not happy at the end of 6 months, no pressure. You walk away, and we'll still part as friends." Ethan looked at the contract. It was more than generous, it was surreal. He wasn't just being offered a job, he was being offered a seat at a table he never imagined existed. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. "What if I fail?" he finally asked. Claire smiled gently. "Everyone fails sometimes, but the only real failure is never trying. You've already proven more in one stormy night than most people show in years." And with that, Ethan's decision crystallized. He felt it settle into his bones like an engine locking into place. It wasn't about the money or the prestige. It was about using his skills to build something that mattered, about taking a leap, even when it scared him. He reached for the pen, signed his name, and exhaled. Claire extended her hand. "Welcome to Wextech, Ethan." As he shook her hand, the doubts melted into something else. Hope, purpose, maybe even pride. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just fixing other people's problems. He was building something new, something that could change lives far beyond the boundaries of Millfield. And it all started because he had stopped in the rain, without expecting anything in return. 6 months later, the garage in Millfield stood quiet, its paint now fading just a bit more, its tools untouched since Ethan Cole had locked the door that final day. But across the state, in a gleaming complex surrounded by trees and solar panels, Ethan stood before a half-assembled prototype vehicle. His design, his vision, being prepared for field testing. It wasn't the kind of machine people drove for comfort or luxury. This vehicle was meant for crisis zones, rugged terrain, flooded villages, war-torn streets. And thanks to Ethan's mechanical intuition and the team of engineers he'd come to lead, it could climb debris-strewn hills, purify water, and even deliver medical supplies by drone from its roof. The first few months at Wextech had been the hardest of Ethan's life. He was constantly reminded that he didn't speak the same language as the engineers around him. At least, not at first. They had formulas, he had feel. They had simulations, he had decades of grease-stained trial and error. At meetings, he sometimes kept quiet, afraid of sounding ignorant. But slowly, something remarkable happened. Claire's team began to listen to him. not out of politeness, but because his solutions worked. While others theorized, Ethan built. When he talked, people took notes. He learned too. He studied engineering diagrams late into the night, devoured technical books, and asked questions without shame. It wasn't easy, but he was never alone. Claire made sure he had mentors, and she checked in regularly, not as a boss, but as a friend who believed in him from day one. Over time, Ethan went from an outsider to an innovator. The same hands that used to tinker with rusty mufflers now assembled parts made of carbon composites and cutting-edge alloys. When their first test vehicle succeeded beyond expectations, navigating a mock disaster zone without a single mechanical failure, Ethan's name was listed alongside PhDs and project leads. Claire had insisted. The press called it a breakthrough. She called it Ethan's proof of purpose. But for Ethan, the greatest reward wasn't the recognition or the money. It was the letter he received from a humanitarian group using his prototype in Southeast Asia. It was written by a field medic who had delivered medicine to a remote flood-affected village using the very system Ethan had built. The final line read, "You don't know us, but because of your work we're still here." That was the moment Ethan cried. Not from pride, but from gratitude. Eventually, Ethan returned to Millfield, not to stay but to give back. He used part of his Wextech earnings to renovate his old garage and turn it into a vocational training center for local youth. He hired retired mechanics and brought in visiting engineers. His goal was simple: teach people the way he had learned, hands-on, heart first. Kids who had once hung around gas stations or skipped school were now lining up to learn how to weld, design, and build. The town, once indifferent to the quiet man who fixed their brakes, now spoke his name with admiration. They knew about the helicopter. They'd seen him on the local news. But to them, Ethan was still the same guy who changed oil with a smile and never overcharged. Only now, he was showing the next generation how to reach higher than he ever had. Claire visited once, landing quietly in a smaller, sleeker aircraft this time. She toured the training center, shook hands with the students, and stood beside Ethan as he unveiled the plaque that read, "Built on kindness, powered by purpose." As the sun dipped below the hills, Ethan looked around. The place where he had grown, struggled, and now blossomed into something he never thought he could be. From that rainy night with a stranded stranger to international projects, innovation labs, and the laughter of teens welding their first metal plates, his journey had been anything but ordinary. It all came down to one moment of compassion. A jacket in the rain, a warm cup of coffee, a hand extended without expecting anything in return. Sometimes the road to greatness doesn't start with ambition. Sometimes it starts with kindness. And for Ethan Cole, it started with helping a woman in the rain